Inside a Manhattan penthouse, laughter cut through the room as Adrian Cole, a quiet waiter in a worn black suit, stood frozen with a tray of champagne. A red stain bled across the white marble near his shoes. Scarlett Vane, the Billionaire host, smiled without warmth and said, "On your knees. Clean it." The guests laughed harder. Preston raised his glass. Margot lifted her phone and began to record. Adrian did not move. He did not speak. He only lowered his eyes for 3 long seconds. No one in that room understood those 3 seconds had already ended them. The penthouse sat 82 floors above Manhattan, a glass box suspended over the city's weekday glow. Inside, the air smelled of cold champagne and warm perfume. A string quartet played near the window, but no one listened. The guests had gathered to be seen, not to hear music. Adrian Cole moved among them carrying a silver tray. His black suit was one size too loose at the shoulders, and a shade lighter than the others the waitstaff wore, as if it had been washed too many times. No one looked at him. He had learned long ago that men who carried trays in rooms like this were a kind of furniture, present useful unremarked. He had worked 3 double shifts that week. Something small buzzed once against his ribs and went quiet again. He did not reach for it. Not here. Not in front of these people. He let the tray stay level and kept moving. At the center of the room stood Scarlett Vane. She did not introduce herself to her own guests. She did not have to. Everyone in that room had read her name on a magazine cover at least once that year. She wore a slate-gray dress and a thin silver watch, and she held her glass the way people hold something they have already decided to put down. "Bring the good bottles out, Adrian, or whatever your name is," Scarlett said without looking at him. "My guests are bored." He nodded once. "Yes, ma'am." Across the room, Preston Hale was holding court with a low, polished laugh. He was a Wall Street lawyer who liked the sound of his own voice and was used to rooms that agreed with him. Beside him, Margot Bellamy tapped her phone screen lazily between sips, her mouth always on the edge of a smile that had nothing to do with kindness. A younger man, Damian Ruiz, stood at their elbow and laughed half a second after everyone else, always in the direction of whoever seemed to be winning the conversation. Near the far wall, a broad man in a black jacket kept still. Scarlett had introduced him to a guest earlier as Marcus, her head of security, in the same tone she used to name the caterer. He had been watching the room all evening with the patience of a man who had watched many rooms. "Tell me something, friend," Preston said as Adrian passed. "What does a man make doing this ballpark?" Adrian kept his voice level. "Enough, sir. Enough." Preston repeated the word like it was a flavor he did not recognize. "Enough for what?" Margot answered for him, without lifting her eyes from her screen. "Enough for the train home, probably. Enough for one of those tiny apartments with the bathtub in the kitchen." She smiled at her own line. A small ring of guests smiled with her. Adrian stepped around them and refilled a glass on a side table. His hands were steady. They had learned to be steady a long time before this night. Scarlett drifted closer, not toward him exactly, but close enough that her guests understood a performance was about to begin. She had a way of moving through a room that rearranged it. People turned without deciding to turn. Conversations dimmed. "You know what I love about nights like this," Scarlett said loud enough for the whole floor to hear. "The honesty. Everyone here earned their place." Her eyes drifted toward Adrian with the same detachment she might use to read a stock ticker. Or didn't. A soft laugh rippled through the room. Damian laughed loudest. Preston raised his glass in a silent toast to nothing in particular. Adrian turned with his tray to move on, and that was when Damian stepped back without looking. His shoulder hit the tray. The motion was small. The consequence was not. A full glass of red wine tipped, rolled off the silver edge, and opened across the white marble in a single dark bloom. A few droplets caught the hem of Scarlett's dress. The room drew one breath at the same time. "Oh no," Margot said, already lifting her phone. "Oh, this is good." Damien recovered first. "That was him," the young investor said quickly. He swung the tray. Adrian made no protest. He crouched down, took the linen from his arm, and began to lift the broken glass away from the spill. He worked the way a man works when he has cleaned up many things in his life that were not his fault. "Stop," Scarlett said. He looked up. The billionaire was smiling, but the smile had a thin edge to it now, the kind that showed only when the room was watching, and she wanted to be sure it kept watching. "Not like that," she said. "Down, on your knees. I want you to clean it properly, from where it belongs." The laughter that answered her was not kind. It was the laughter of people who had been told without being told that they were allowed. "Scarlett," Preston lifted his glass again. "You are cruel tonight." "I am honest tonight," she said. "There is a difference." Marcus stepped forward from the wall, not close, just close enough to be seen. The message was clear. There was one way out of this moment, and it passed through the marble floor. Adrian stayed where he was, crouched, the stained cloth in his hand. His heartbeat held steady. His face held steady. But behind his eyes, something that had been sleeping for a long time opened a single quiet eye. He thought briefly of the device in his inner pocket. He thought of the man he had been before he had put on a loose black suit and learned to carry trays through rooms like this one. He thought about what it had cost him to build the small, quiet life he now had, and what it would cost to burn the quiet part of it down. In that stillness, his thumb slid once against the phone's screen through the fabric of the pocket. A small command, long prepared, was already waiting for it. The command moved. In a server he had visited only on paper, a file took its last breath of privacy and began its journey to a prosecutor's inbox. 3 seconds. That was all it took. He set the cloth down on the tray. He straightened. He had never gone to his knees, and he rose to his full height slower than the room expected. And he looked at Scarlett Vane for the first time that evening, as a man, not as a tray. "No," Adrian said. The word wasn't loud. It did not need to be. The laughter in the room thinned at the edges. Margot's phone was still up, still recording, but her smile had gone uncertain at the corners. Preston lowered his glass a half-inch, without meaning to. Damien looked toward Scarlett, the way he always looked at her for instruction, and found for the first time that evening that she was not ready to give any. Scarlett tilted her head. The smile stayed, but the eyes behind it had changed register. "Excuse me, I said no." Adrian answered, his voice quiet and even. "I will clean the floor. I will not kneel for it." "You understand," she said, stepping one pace closer, her heels making 2 small sounds against the marble, "that I can end your employment tonight. I can end it for every company in the borough. I can end it before you reach the elevator." "I understand," Adrian said. "Then get down." He held where he stood. The string quartet, unaware, kept playing. A waiter Adrian did not know had stopped in the doorway with a tray of his own and was watching without breathing. Marcus took another step forward and then held again, waiting for the nod that would tell him what kind of night this was going to be. Scarlett let out a short, almost surprised laugh. "Look at him," she said to the room. "He thinks refusing me means something." A few of the guests laughed back, but the laugh did not travel the way her laughs usually traveled. It rose in patches, then fell. Something had shifted in the floor beneath all of them, and they didn't yet know what. Adrian let his hand rest against his chest over the shape of the phone beneath the cloth. The way a man rests his hand against a door he has decided at last to open. Scarlett studied him, the way a person studies a small crack in expensive glass, deciding whether it was worth the trouble of replacing the whole panel. The spill had widened into a shape no one wanted to name. The laughter in the room had gone flat. Something needed to happen, and she was the only one allowed to decide what. "Marcus," she said, without turning her head. The head of security crossed the floor. He moved toward Adrian. the way movers move toward a piece of furniture that has been marked for the curb. "Escort him out," Scarlett said. "Through the service door. Keep him off the main elevator. I do not want him photographed." "Yes, ma'am," Marcus answered. Preston lifted his glass a second time. "There it is," the lawyer said, half to the room and half to himself. "That is the sound of a man losing his Tuesday." Margot laughed through her nose. Her phone was still recording. Damien drifted a half step behind her, waiting to be told what to feel. Marcus reached for Adrian's arm. Adrian let him take cloth instead of skin, turning his shoulder, a small, deliberate degree, and he spoke not to the security man, but to the woman across the room. "Before he walks me out," Adrian said, "you should look at your screen." Scarlett almost laughed. "My screen. The wall screen." He lifted his chin once toward the large display mounted above the fireplace, the one that had been cycling slow black and white photographs of the city all evening. "Look." "Marcus," Scarlett said. "Anytime." Marcus tightened his grip. Adrian let his free hand settle along his side. He had already sent the first command, minutes before, in silence. The second one needed only a breath of attention. His thumb found the screen inside the pocket and moved once. The wall blinked. The slow photographs vanished. In their place appeared a pale blue interface no one in that room was supposed to be able to see from the outside. A column of account balances, a list of transfers, a header that read in small, clean letters, "Vane Holdings, Internal Treasury." "Liv." Preston's glass came down without a sound. Margot lowered her phone. Damien's mouth opened and stayed open. Scarlett looked at the screen for one full second before she spoke. And in that second, her face did something it had not done all evening. It thought. "Turn that off," she said. The numbers kept updating. A line near the bottom ticked over from one value to another. Somewhere in a server room in New Jersey, a machine that belonged to her was reporting honestly to a room that was not supposed to be listening. "Marcus," she said, sharper now. "Step back." Marcus released Adrian's sleeve. He could not have said exactly why. He only knew the air in the penthouse had changed temperature, and his paycheck depended on reading rooms correctly. Adrian held where he stood. His voice stayed low. 4 years ago. He said, a small firm in Jersey City sold a security architecture to a woman who had just taken her first company public. The firm had 3 engineers. The lead engineer wrote the core. He signed the papers at a folding table in a rented office because the firm could not afford a conference room. Scarlett's eyes had not left the screen. "Turn it off." She bought the architecture for what at the time she could afford, Adrian continued. Then she bought the firm. Then she dissolved it. The lead engineer's name came off the patents during a restructuring he was not invited to. His voice stayed level. "That engineer is standing in your living room holding a tray. A single intake of breath traveled around the room, moving guest to guest like a current." Margot's phone drifted down until it hung at her side. Preston was no longer smiling. Damien looked at Scarlett, found nothing useful in her face, and looked at the floor instead. "You are lying," Scarlett said. Her voice had not lost its edge, but something underneath it had begun to tilt. "That engineer signed non-disclosures. That engineer signed away every line of code." "He signed away the code," Adrian said. "He did not sign away the key." The numbers on the wall ticked again. "You remember the key," he said. "You remember him asking what would happen if the system was ever compromised from the inside. You remember him insisting on a recovery route that only the original author could invoke. You said yes because you did not think you would ever need it. You said yes because you did not think he would ever be in the same room as you again." Scarlett's hand had gone to the thin silver watch on her wrist without her noticing. She took her hand away deliberately. "You have committed," she said slowly, "a federal crime. You have accessed a private treasury. You have displayed proprietary information to unauthorized persons. I can have you in a cell before midnight." "You can try," Adrian said. "I will. You will not." The quiet in his voice matched the quiet that had been there when he crouched to pick up the broken glass. Because everything on that wall was put there by the person whose name is still legally on the recovery credentials. Mine, not yours. Your own attorneys drafted that clause. I assume they are in this room. Preston kept his eyes on his glass. "Preston," Scarlett said. Preston cleared his throat. There was a clause. There was a clause," Scarlett repeated in the tone of a person discovering the floor has been missing for some time. "You never mentioned it." "It was dormant," Preston said. "It has been dormant for 4 years. It is triggered only by the original author under specific conditions." "What conditions?" Preston's eyes moved finally toward Adrian, and then back down. "Evidence of misuse." A silence walked across the room. It did not stop at any one guest. It touched all of them. "Misuse," Scarlett said. Adrian said nothing to that word. He only looked at her, and the look said what the answer would have been. She understood then that he was not here for a tray. She understood that he had not stumbled into this penthouse. She understood that every step she had taken tonight, the laugh, the order, the call for security had been taken on a floor that belonged quietly to him. "Turn it off," she said again. "Whatever this is, turn it off and name a number. Everyone in this room has a number. Name yours." "I already named it," Adrian said. "You have not named anything." "I named it when you told me to get on my knees," he said. "You were listening to your own voice." Margot lowered herself onto the arm of a sofa as if she had been standing too long. Damien looked for the first time all evening like a man who wished he had skipped the party. Preston set his glass down on a side table and left it there. Adrian looked down at the phone in his hand. His thumb rested above a single pale square on the screen. He had not yet tapped it. He looked up once more, as if to give the room one last chance to be a different room than it had been. "You are not going to do anything with that phone," Scarlett said. Her voice had gone almost gentle, the way voices go gentle when they have stopped being sure. "You are going to set it down, and we are going to talk like adults." "We could have talked like adults an hour ago," Adrian said. "You wanted a show instead." His thumb came down. The wall refreshed. A new header appeared above the column of balances. It read in the same small, clean letters, "Emergency Lock Treasury," and linked accounts engaged. A soft sound followed. It was not loud. It was the sound of a phone vibrating against a glass tabletop. Then another from a clutch on the sofa. Then another from a jacket pocket. A small chorus of them rose, layered and overlapping all across the room, every pocket belonging to a name that appeared somewhere inside the tunnel on the screen. Scarlett's own phone, lying face down on the marble bar, buzzed 3 times in quick succession and kept buzzing. She picked it up. She read the screen. She read it again. The color did not leave her face all at once. It left in stages, moving from her jaw upward to her temples. Her hand, the one holding the phone, did not shake, because Scarlett Vane did not allow her hands to shake. But the knuckles went white, and white was a kind of shaking of its own. "No," she said to no one in particular. "No, no, no." Around the room, phones kept buzzing. Preston lifted his. Margot lifted hers. Damien stared at his screen and read it twice. A woman near the window gave a small, strangled laugh and said the word "frozen," as if testing whether it was a real word. Adrian slid the phone back into his inner pocket. He did not look triumphant. He only looked tired in a new way, as if a long job had reached the last page of its instructions, and the page was shorter than he had hoped. "That," he said quietly, "is what misuse costs." The buzzing did not stop. It grew. Every pocket that had ever been paid through one of Scarlett's tunnels was now a small alarm, and no one knew how to turn any of them off. A woman on the sofa dropped her phone onto a cushion as if it had grown warm. Preston was scrolling through a screen that refused to load. Margot tapped, tapped again, and then looked up with the expression of a person who had just realized the exit behind her had already been locked. "Marcus," Scarlett said without taking her eyes off her own screen. "Call the bank. Call Jennifer. Call the desk at Goldman. Call anyone." "Ma'am," Marcus answered from the wall. His voice had flattened. "The corporate lines are not going through. The Treasury desk is not picking up." "Then call my personal banker." "I am, ma'am." She lowered her phone slowly. For the first time that evening, she looked around her own living room as if she did not recognize several of the faces in it. The faces did not look back at her the way they had an hour before. Preston had turned, slightly, not enough to be obvious, but enough that his shoulder was no longer square to hers. Margot had moved one seat further along the sofa. Damien was standing near the hallway without having decided to stand there. "This is a mistake," Scarlett said to the room in general. "There is a technical error. We will have it resolved in 15 minutes. No one answered her. A few guests looked at their phones again, as if the numbers might have corrected themselves while she was speaking. The numbers had not. She turned toward Adrian. "Unlock it." "No, unlock it, and I will forget tonight happened." Her voice had taken on a quality it had not carried before, thin and almost careful. "You walk out of here, you keep whatever you think you are owed, and we call this a misunderstanding." "You do not get to call this a misunderstanding. Name a figure." "I already told you," Adrian said. "You were not listening." A soft chime came from the wall. The interface refreshed. A new panel opened underneath the Treasury column. It showed a folder tree, dozens of folders, nested, each labeled with a date, a project code, a counterparty. Shell accounts in 3 jurisdictions, movement of funds through entities that did not appear in any public filing Vane Holdings had ever submitted. A long row of small red flags ran down the right-hand side of the screen, one flag for each line that did not match the books Scarlett's investors had been shown. Preston made a sound in his throat that was not quite a word. Damien's eyes moved from the wall to his own phone and back. Somewhere in those folders, his name sat on a line he had never expected to have to explain. His face lost its color in a single even sweep. "That," Adrian said, "is what your architecture was really protecting. Not a company, a tunnel. You used the system I built to move money through accounts that were not supposed to exist and to flatten the records so your auditors never saw the shape of it. Every person whose phone is buzzing in this room tonight touched that tunnel. The recovery clause I wrote 4 years ago was meant for exactly this. For the day the tool was used as a weapon by everyone holding it." "You cannot prove any of that in a room," Scarlett said. "I am not proving it in a room," Adrian answered. "I already sent the proof to the people who asked me to collect it. Minutes ago, while you were laughing." The wall changed once more. A small line of text appeared across the top in the same pale blue as everything else. It read, "Package transmitted Southern District of New York, confirmed receipt." A timestamp sat beside it. The timestamp matched the minute she had told him to kneel. Margot stood up from the sofa without seeming to know she was standing. Damien had already taken 2 steps toward the hallway. Preston looked at Scarlett, and for the first time that evening, had nothing to say. "You sent it. When I—" Scarlett stopped. "When you told me to kneel," Adrian said. "Yes. The command was ready before I walked in here tonight. Your own words finished it." She looked at the screen for a long moment. She looked at Preston, who did not return the look. She looked at Marcus, whose hands were at his sides. She looked at the spill on the floor and looked away from it. "You planned this," she said. "I waited for it," Adrian said. "That is a different thing." "For how long?" "Long enough to know that if I did not do it, no one would." Her shoulders did something small, then something that would have been invisible in any other room. The slate-gray dress hung the same as before, but the woman inside it was no longer the woman who had told him to kneel. The voice that had arranged the evening had gone quiet. What was left was a person reading a screen and beginning finally to understand the size of what the screen said. "Scarlett!" Preston's voice had lost its polish. The lawyer was already halfway through a calculation that did not involve her. "I need to make a call." "Preston." "I need to make a call," he repeated, stepping away from her toward the window phone already at his ear. He did not look back. Margot was next. She said nothing at all. She picked up her clutch from the sofa, checked that her phone was inside it, and walked toward the hallway without meeting anyone's eyes. Damien trailed after her, like a man who had been waiting for permission to leave, and had decided at last that permission was not coming. One by one, the rest of the room began to move. A man near the quartet murmured to his wife. A woman by the bar set down her glass and left it there. The string players who had kept playing because no one had told them to stop noticed at last that the room around them had cooled and let the piece trail off into an unfinished bar. Scarlett was still looking at the screen. "This is my house," she said to no one or to herself. "This is my house." Adrian stepped past her toward the door. He kept the same pace he had kept with the tray, calm and unremarkable, except that there was no tray now, and he was no longer invisible. Near the elevator, he stopped. He turned only part way, only enough to speak over his shoulder. "You asked me earlier what my name was," he said. "It is on every patent you are about to lose." She had no answer for that. The elevator arrived with a soft tone. Adrian stepped inside. The doors closed over the penthouse and its broken evening over the wall that was still quietly listing the accounts she would not be able to reach for a very long time. On the ground floor, the doorman opened the lobby door without comment, the way he had opened it for him earlier that night, when he had arrived in a loose black suit with a folded assignment sheet in his pocket. The doorman saw no difference in him. There was no reason to. The Manhattan street was cold, in the way late evenings are cold in that city, a clean, indifferent cold that took no notice of one more man stepping out of one more building. Adrian loosened the collar of the black suit. He walked east toward the avenue into a sidewalk already full of other people with their own small, unseen lives. Something buzzed once against his ribs, and this time he took the phone out. He did not read a headline. He did not check the accounts. He only looked at the plain home screen for a moment, the way a person looks at a door he has closed behind him, and then he put the phone away. Behind him, 82 floors up, a woman in a slate-gray dress stood alone in a room that had been full an hour before. The guests were gone. The quartet had packed its instruments. Preston was somewhere downstairs trying to reach a lawyer of his own. The dark spot on the marble remained where it had fallen unnoticed now, by anyone whose opinion had ever mattered to her. She set her phone down on the bar. She looked at the wall, at the long row of small red flags at the timestamp that was already several minutes older than it had been when she first read it. She understood without anyone having to explain it that the building she was standing in was no longer in any meaningful sense hers. Respect, as it turned out, had never been something she could buy with the room. It had only ever been something she had chosen every evening like this one not to give. The man she had ordered to kneel had understood that better than she had. He had simply waited for the night she forgot it in front of the wrong person, and then he had let the room find out all at once what the cost of that forgetting was.